The flashing red and blue lights pulsed against my locked gate, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching as two officers stepped out of their cruiser. My neighbor, Linda, was already in full performance mode, arms flailing as she demanded justice for what she called a community emergency. I knew how this was going to play out before the first word even left their mouths. She had done this before, always looking for a fight, always inserting herself into other people's business, but this time, something about it felt different. More desperate. "Sir," the older officer, his badge reading Sergeant Howard, called out as he approached. "We received a report about an unauthorized obstruction on what might be a public access road." I exhaled, rubbing my temple. "It's not a public road. It's my driveway. Private property. And I have every right to close it off." Linda scoffed, her voice dripping with indignation. "That's not true. This road has always been open. People use it all the time. You can't just block it off. People use it because they don't respect property lines," I shot back. "That doesn't make it theirs." That made her even angrier. The younger officer, whose tag read Patrolman Carter, glanced at the thick folder of documents sitting on my patio table. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have proof of ownership?" I picked up the deed and held it out. "Right here. This driveway has been private property since the house was built. Nothing's changed, except that I finally got tired of people treating it like a public road." Howard took the papers, skimming them before glancing at Linda. "Then why all the fuss now?" Linda crossed her arms, her face turning an impressive shade of red. "Because he blocked off something people have been using for years. What if there's an emergency? What if services need to get through?" I pointed at the street. "There's a public road right there, Linda. This isn't the only way in or out of the neighborhood." Howard sighed, handing my documents back. "Legally, he's right. If it's private property, he has the right to restrict access." Linda's mouth fell open. "Are you serious? This isn't over." Carter, however, still looked skeptical. "With all due respect, sir, why now? Why close it all of a sudden?" I hesitated. That was the real question, wasn't it? For years, I had tolerated it, neighbors, delivery drivers, even strangers cutting through my driveway like it was some public shortcut. It annoyed me, sure, but I let it slide. Until last week. Until I found something I wasn't supposed to. I had been digging near the far end of my property, thinking about expanding my workshop, when my shovel struck something solid. At first, I thought it was just a buried rock, but as I cleared away more dirt, I realized it wasn't natural at all. Smooth, reinforced concrete. Thick. Too even to be a coincidence. My gut told me to stop, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I dug deeper, uncovering what looked like the edge of a sealed tunnel. The more I unearthed, the more uneasy I felt. The concrete wasn't just old, it was deliberately buried, hidden beneath decades of dirt and neglect. And from the moment I found it, things started happening. That night, my security cameras caught something strange. Two men in dark clothing walking along my driveway. They weren't neighbors. They weren't police. They didn't carry flashlights, didn't make a sound, just moved with purpose. They stopped exactly where I had been digging, stood there for a moment, then left. The next morning, I found my fence had been tampered with. The lock, which I had installed myself, had been clipped and hastily replaced with another, one I didn't recognize. That was enough to send a chill down my spine. I checked my security footage again, rewinding, watching frame by frame. 3:27 a.m. Two figures emerged from the shadows. One held bolt cutters. The other crouched low, pressing his hands against the disturbed dirt where I had been digging, almost like he was searching for something. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they disappeared. Later that day, as I stepped onto my porch, I overheard Linda talking to another neighbor. Her voice was hushed, urgent. This wasn't just her usual nosy gossip. She sounded nervous. I watched from a distance, noting how often she glanced toward my house, toward the spot where I had been digging. Did she know something? Was this why she was suddenly so determined to keep my driveway open? I didn't say anything to her. Instead, I just shrugged when Sergeant Howard asked why I had put up the gate. I was tired of people trespassing, I said. Thought it was time to set some boundaries. Howard studied me for a long moment but said nothing. Carter, however, wasn't convinced. Mind if we take a look at where you closed it off? I gestured toward the gate. Be my guest. The two officers walked over to the gate, inspecting the heavy-duty steel barrier I had installed just last week. It was solid, reinforced, built to last. Short of a battering ram, nothing was getting through. Linda stood behind them, arms crossed, her glare burning a hole in the back of my head. He's hiding something, she hissed. Why else would he suddenly block the driveway? I turned to her, lowering my voice. Linda, I built this gate because I don't want people on my property anymore, and you have no right to tell me otherwise. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, fear, or maybe something else. Before she could say another word, the deep hum of an approaching engine reached my ears. A black SUV rolled past on the street, slowing ever so slightly as it neared my house. It didn't stop, didn't linger, but I saw it. And I saw how Carter's jaw tightened the moment he did too. That night, after the police left and Linda stormed back into her house, I sat in my workshop, reviewing my security footage again. The SUV had circled my block 3 times. Once at 9 p.m. Again at midnight. And finally, just before dawn. The license plate didn't look familiar, but something told me I wasn't supposed to recognize it. My fingers tapped absently against the armrest of my chair as I rewound the footage again, frame by frame. The back of my neck prickled. I had spent the past week trying to convince myself this was just paranoia. That I had imagined the figures in the night. The clipped lock. The strange unease in Linda's eyes. But watching that SUV creep past my house again and again, I knew the truth. Someone was watching me. And they weren't trying very hard to hide it. The engine of that SUV had faded into the distance, but the tension in my chest refused to ease. I shut off the screen before my paranoia got the best of me, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I forced myself to get some sleep, but my gut told me I wasn't going to like what came next. The sharp knocking at my door jolted me awake the next morning. My pulse jumped before I even opened my eyes. I rolled out of bed, pulled on a t-shirt, and made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw Carter standing on my porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Not exactly the wake-up call I wanted. I cracked the door just enough to see him. Officer. Something I can help you with? Carter didn't answer right away. He glanced toward my driveway, then back at me. Can we talk inside? I hesitated. Then, I stepped aside, letting him in. He walked straight into my living room, like he already knew the layout. I shut the door behind him, watching him carefully. What's this about? I asked. Carter turned to me, his voice lower than before. I need you to tell me exactly what you found. I tensed, my fingers instinctively curling at my sides. You saw the paperwork. It's my property. What I do with it is my business. Carter exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Look, I know what the law says. But I also know when someone's holding back. And after last night, I need to know if you're in danger. My chest tightened. What do you mean, after last night? He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and swiped through the screen before holding it up for me to see. A grainy image, captured from his dashcam. The black SUV. Parked 2 blocks from my house. The timestamp read 4:17 a.m. My jaw clenched. You followed them? Carter shook his head. I didn't have to. I was patrolling near the neighborhood and caught it on my camera. Thought it was odd, so I ran the plates. He hesitated, his expression shifting. No registration. It's not in any database. A chill ran through me. So, whoever's in that car isn't just some nosy neighbor. Carter's gaze met mine. That's why I need you to tell me exactly what's going on. What did you find under that driveway? I swallowed hard, debating how much to say. I could lie, pretend it was nothing. But that wouldn't help me. I walked over to the patio door, pulling back the curtain and pointing toward the far end of my property. It's not just a driveway. There's something underneath it. Some kind of structure. I don't know how deep it goes, but it's old. And it was sealed off intentionally. Carter followed my gaze, his face unreadable. And you uncovered it. Part of it. Enough to know it wasn't meant to be found. He exhaled slowly. I need to see it. I stiffened. That's not a good idea. Carter's eyes narrowed. And why is that? I turned to face him. Because someone else doesn't want it to be seen. And they're watching. For the first time, Carter looked genuinely unsettled. He glanced toward the window, his hand instinctively brushing against his holster. You think whoever was in that SUV knows what you found? I didn't hesitate. I don't think. I know. Carter was silent for a moment, then took a deep breath, nodding once. Then we need to move fast. Show me, now. I hesitated. Letting him see meant bringing him into this mess. But keeping it to myself meant I was facing it alone. And if last night was any indication, that wasn't an option anymore. All right, I finally said. But if we do this, we do it my way. No backup. No radio calls. Just us. Carter's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Lead the way. As we stepped outside, the morning air was still. Unnaturally quiet. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, making every movement feel heavier. Whoever was watching wasn't done yet. And neither was I. I led Carter toward the far end of my property, each step careful, measured. The early morning air was unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Even the birds seemed to avoid this part of my land. I crouched near the disturbed dirt where I had started digging days ago and pulled back the tarp I had laid over the site. Beneath it, the smooth concrete surface gleamed slightly under the weak sunlight, untouched by time. Carter knelt beside it, running his fingers along the seam. This isn't normal, he muttered. You're right, I said, my stomach tightening. And that's the problem. He pressed his palm against the surface, frowning. It's cold. And not just from being underground. This thing is insulated. Reinforced. I exhaled slowly. Then it's not just an old bunker. Carter stood abruptly, scanning the tree line, his jaw clenched. I don't like this. Someone built this for a reason, and they didn't expect anyone to find it. I ran a hand through my hair. You think it's military? He hesitated. Could be. Or something else. His gaze returned to the slab. Either way, you shouldn't be anywhere near it. I stared at him incredulously. Now you sound like the guys in that SUV. Just forget about it, right? Walk away. Carter held my gaze, something new in his expression now, fear. I'm saying you might not have a choice. I didn't like the way he said that, the way his voice lowered just enough to make it feel more like a warning than a suggestion. My breath was visible in the cool morning air. If I wasn't supposed to have a choice, then someone was going to make sure I didn't. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, turning every movement heavy. Carter took a step back from the uncovered concrete, shaking his head. This isn't just some abandoned structure. The way it's sealed, the way it's built, this was never meant to be found. I crouched again, running my hand along the surface. The material felt different than I expected. It wasn't just reinforced concrete. There was metal beneath it, something dense and cold. I looked up at him. Someone knew it was here. Maybe they even expected me to find it. Carter's jaw tightened. If that's the case, then you've got a much bigger problem. I heard the low hum of an engine before I saw the vehicle. My stomach twisted as I turned toward the street. Another black SUV. Not the same one from last night, but close enough that it didn't matter. It rolled past my house slowly, deliberately, as if whoever was inside wanted to make sure I saw them. Carter tensed beside me, his hand brushing his holster. This isn't good. No kidding, I muttered. The SUV didn't stop, just kept going, disappearing around the bend. But I knew better than to think that meant I was in the clear. I turned back to Carter. Tell me you got a plate this time. He pulled out his phone, checking his dash cam feed. The numbers were blurry but still legible. He muttered them under his breath, then froze. What is it? I asked, watching the color drain from his face. Carter hesitated before looking up at me. It's registered to a government fleet. My chest tightened. But? Carter exhaled slowly. But there's no department listed. No agency. Just a blank record. The pit in my stomach deepened. So, whoever they are, they don't want to be found. Carter pocketed his phone. If they know we're looking, they'll escalate. You need to be careful. I stared down at the concrete slab, my gut screaming at me that I was already in too deep. What do you think is down there? Carter didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me with something almost like pity. I don't know. But I don't think you're ready to find out. I stood up, dusting off my hands. Ready or not, I don't think I have a choice anymore. I glanced back at the road where the SUV had disappeared. If they wanted to keep this a secret, they shouldn't have made it so obvious. Carter shook his head. You don't get it. They don't care if you know. They care if you talk. And if they think you might be a problem, his voice trailed off, but I already knew how that sentence ended. My jaw tightened. Then I guess I need to find out the truth before they get the chance. Carter looked toward the road again, his expression darkening. If we do this, we do it right. No mistakes. No reckless digging. We figure out what we're dealing with first. I nodded, pulse pounding. Then let's start figuring it out. We covered the slab back up and walked toward the house. Every step felt like an invitation for something unseen to strike. The paranoia was settling in, creeping into my bones. I locked the doors behind us, watching as Carter checked his phone again. He frowned. The SUV is still circling the block. My stomach twisted. They're waiting for something. Or someone. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the security footage from the night before. Rewinding back to when the SUV had slowed outside my house, my fingers tightened around the mouse as I zoomed in. The windows were tinted, but the glare from a streetlight briefly illuminated the outline of the driver. A man. Wearing a dark suit. I turned to Carter. This isn't just some private contractor. Carter leaned over my shoulder, his expression grim. If they're watching this closely, they already know you found something. He exhaled sharply. And if they haven't moved in yet, it means they're waiting to see what you do next. My pulse hammered against my ribs. So they want me to make a mistake. Carter rubbed his jaw. Exactly. The moment you step out of line, they'll have a reason to act. He met my eyes. Which means you need to be smart about this. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind racing. I had planned to dig deeper today. Maybe even pry open whatever was beneath that concrete. But now, I wasn't sure that was an option anymore. A sudden noise outside made both of us freeze. A sharp knock at the front door. My stomach twisted. We weren't expecting anyone. Carter exchanged a glance with me, his hand drifting toward his gun. "Stay here," he muttered before stepping toward the door. I didn't argue. I watched as he peered through the peephole. His body tensed. He turned back to me, lowering his voice. "It's Linda." I blinked, caught off guard. Linda? What the hell does she want now? Carter hesitated, then opened the door just enough to see her. She looked rattled. The usual self-righteous anger she carried was gone. Instead, her face was pale, her expression tight, her hands fidgeting at her sides. She glanced at Carter, then passed him at me. We need to talk. Now." I frowned. "About what?" Linda took a shaky breath and stepped closer. "About them. The people watching you." My blood ran cold. Linda had been a thorn in my side since this whole mess started. But now, standing there, wide-eyed and panicked, I realized something I hadn't considered before. She knew more than she had been letting on. And if she was scared, then I needed to be too. Linda stood on my porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her usual self-righteous glare replaced with something I had never seen before, fear. Carter kept a hand near his holster, his body positioned slightly in front of me, a silent warning that this was not the time for games. I had never seen Linda rattled before. The fact that she was standing here now, looking over her shoulder like someone might be watching her, told me she had more to say than her usual complaints. I stepped forward, arms crossed. This better be good. She exhaled sharply, her jaw tightening like she was about to say something she'd regret. It took her a second, but then her gaze locked onto mine, and I saw it, genuine fear. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." I exchanged a glance with Carter, who was watching her closely. "I think I have some idea." She shook her head quickly. "No, you don't." I gestured toward the living room. "Inside. Now." Linda hesitated for only a second before stepping past Carter and walking into my house. She stood stiffly near the window, peeking through the curtains like she expected someone to be out there. Carter shut the door behind her, arms still crossed. "Start talking." Linda rubbed her arms, her voice lower than usual. "I don't know exactly who they are, but I know they've been watching you for a while. They don't like attention, and they definitely don't like people asking questions." I narrowed my eyes. "And how do you know that?" She swallowed hard. "Because I made the mistake of asking questions once. And they made sure I wouldn't do it again." Carter stepped forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Linda hesitated, then exhaled sharply, shaking her head like she hated saying it out loud. "My brother used to work in real estate development. A few years ago, his company was hired to assess land values in this area, including your property. Everything was routine until he started digging into the records and found something that didn't make sense. A discrepancy. Something about your land never being properly recorded as available for private purchase." A chill ran through me. And what happened? The next week, he got a visit from men in suits. 2 days later, his office burned down. He quit his job the next day. Never talked about it again. My pulse pounded in my ears. "And you're only telling me this now?" Linda's eyes flashed with frustration. "You think I wanted to get involved? I knew what they were capable of. But after what I saw last night, I can't just pretend anymore." Carter's expression darkened. "What did you see?" Linda exhaled. "The SUV. It wasn't just watching you. It was watching me too. I saw it parked outside my house at 2 in the morning. Someone was standing next to it, watching your property. And then they turned and looked directly at my window. Like they knew I was there. Carter rubbed his jaw. They're tightening their grip. I turned to Linda. And why tell me this? Why not just stay out of it? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Because I realized something. If they're willing to go after me just for knowing too much, then you're already in way deeper than I ever was. You think they're just watching you? No. They're waiting for you to make a move so they can act first. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. So what do you suggest? Linda hesitated. You need to stop. Stop digging. Stop pushing. If you don't, they will make you disappear. Carter's jaw tightened. That's not an option anymore. Linda looked at him sharply. Why? Because you're a cop. You think that matters to them? I stayed silent, processing everything. Linda was right about one thing, I had been treating this like a mystery I could solve. But it wasn't just a puzzle. It was a warning. And warnings came with consequences. I turned back to her. You could have walked away from this. Linda's expression hardened. Maybe. But I know what happens when people pretend nothing's wrong. And I don't want to be next. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Linda had spent years making my life miserable, but now, for the first time, she was afraid of something bigger than both of us. I glanced at Carter. We're running out of time. He nodded. Then we need to move. Now. I grabbed my keys, shoving them into my pocket. We're going to the site. Linda paled. Are you insane? They're watching you. If they see you digging. I cut her off. They already know what I've found. The only thing left is to see what's under there before they try to stop me. Carter pulled out his radio, hesitating for a second before tucking it back into his belt. No backup. No reports. Just us. I nodded. Linda, you don't have to come. She crossed her arms. The hell I don't. If I stay behind, I'll just be another loose end. The three of us moved quickly, slipping out the back door. The weight of unseen eyes followed us. But this time, I wasn't going to stop. Whatever was buried under my land, I was going to find it before they found me first. The night air was thick with tension as we moved toward the site. Linda stuck close to Carter, her usual bravado replaced by a nervous silence. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my ears tuned for any sound out of place. The SUV hadn't circled back yet, but I knew better than to think we were in the clear. If Linda was right, and I was starting to believe she was, then they were waiting, watching, letting me take the next step so they could react accordingly. The flashlight in my hand trembled slightly as I adjusted my grip. I wasn't afraid of what I would find under the slab. I was afraid of what it meant, of why it had been buried in the first place, and of who had been so determined to keep it that way. We reached the tarp-covered section of my property, the dirt still slightly disturbed from where I had last left it. I crouched down and pulled it back, exposing the smooth, cold surface beneath. Carter knelt beside me, running a hand along the seam. Linda stood a few feet away, arms crossed, shifting her weight from foot to foot like she was regretting her decision to come along. I looked at Carter. You ready for this? He exhaled through his nose. Not even a little. I grabbed the crowbar I had stashed nearby and jammed the edge into the smallest crack I could find. The metal groaned against the resistance. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a loose slab of concrete. It was meant to stay shut. Linda took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure we should be doing this? I shot her a look. Now's not the time for second thoughts. Carter moved beside me, gripping the crowbar with both hands. On 3. I nodded, adjusting my stance. 1, 2, we heaved together, muscles straining. The slab shifted slightly, a thin gap forming along the edge. Then the sound hit us, a deep, hollow groan from beneath, like air being released from a pressurized chamber. My stomach clenched. That wasn't normal. Linda backed up quickly. I don't like this. Carter wiped his forehead. Yeah, well, neither do I. I braced myself and wedged the crowbar deeper. We pulled again, this time with more force. The slab gave way another inch, revealing darkness below. The air that rushed out smelled stale, like something long forgotten. My skin prickled. This had been sealed for a reason. Carter aimed his flashlight into the opening, the beam cutting through the black, illuminating a metal ladder leading straight down. The walls looked reinforced, solid, untouched by time. Linda hovered behind us, eyes wide. What the hell is this? I shook my head. I don't know. But I'm going to find out. Carter exhaled, stepping back. No. I'll go first. If something happens, you need to be able to get out of here. Linda scoffed. Yeah, because if something happens, that's exactly what we'll do, just walk away and pretend it didn't. Carter ignored her and started his descent, the flashlight beam bouncing with each step. I gripped the edges of the opening, taking a deep breath before following him down. Linda cursed under her breath before reluctantly climbing in behind me. The air grew colder the further we descended. The walls were smooth metal, marked only by a few faded warning signs in a language I didn't recognize. My foot hit solid ground, and I turned, shining my flashlight ahead. A corridor stretched before us, perfectly intact as if frozen in time. Carter's voice was tight. This isn't just an old bunker. I nodded. No. It's something else. Linda moved up beside me, arms wrapped around herself. Do you hear that? I strained my ears. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a distant mechanical hum. Carter turned his flashlight toward a rusted door at the end of the hall. The sound was coming from behind it. He stepped forward cautiously, fingers brushing the handle. It was unlocked. That meant someone, or something, had been here recently. My heart pounded as Carter pushed the door open. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with outdated computer terminals and thick cables snaking along the walls. A faint hum pulsed from somewhere within, like a machine running on low power, struggling to stay alive after years of abandonment. Dust coated nearly every surface, but something about this place didn't feel forgotten. The air was stale, untouched by time, yet there was an undeniable sense that someone had been here recently. Carter swept his flashlight across the room, his jaw tightening. This place should be dead, he muttered. But it's not. I stepped inside, my boots crunching softly against scattered papers. My flashlight traced over the rows of consoles, the thick monitors covered in grime, their screens cracked and lifeless. But one detail made my stomach twist, the keyboard on the center console. Unlike everything else in the room, it wasn't covered in dust. Someone had used it. Recently. Linda hovered near the doorway, shifting uneasily. This was supposed to be abandoned, right? I didn't answer. My fingers brushed over the console, feeling the slight warmth radiating from it. The system was still drawing power. That didn't happen by accident. I knelt, picking up one of the scattered papers. The ink was smudged, but I could still make out faint markings. The symbols weren't English. Carter stepped closer, glancing over my shoulder. His expression darkened. That's Cyrillic. I blinked. Russian? He nodded. No. Soviet. Linda let out a sharp breath. What the hell is a Soviet document doing in an abandoned facility under your driveway? My pulse hammered in my ears. That was the question, wasn't it? If this was just some old bunker, why was it hidden so deliberately? And why was it still active? Carter wiped grime from a nearby console, revealing a faded emblem underneath. His breath hitched. This isn't American. I leaned in, my flashlight illuminating the barely legible text beneath the emblem. I couldn't read it, but Carter could. He swallowed hard. This is Cold War era. Late-stage Soviet. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just an old military site. This was something else entirely. Something buried, hidden, forgotten by everyone except whoever had been keeping an eye on it. Linda took a step back, shaking her head. No. No, I'm not doing this. You don't just find a secret Soviet bunker under your damn house and keep digging. I turned to her, my voice low. We're already in this. There's no turning back now. Then, from deep within the corridor, a metallic clang echoed through the bunker. A distant, deliberate sound. Followed by the unmistakable noise of footsteps. Carter shut off his flashlight, motioning for silence. I tightened my grip on the crowbar, my breath shallow. We weren't alone down here. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, echoing through the cold metal walls. My pulse pounded in my ears as I instinctively backed up, pressing myself against the console. Carter's hand drifted toward his holster, his body tense, eyes locked on the dark hallway beyond the open door. Linda let out a shaky breath, barely above a whisper. Tell me that's just the pipes settling. I didn't answer. Carter reached out, gripping my arm, his voice low. We need to move. Now. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Whoever had been down here before us had left in a hurry. The console still had power. Someone had been using this place. And now, someone was coming back. I wasn't about to leave without knowing why. I turned, scanning the desk again, my eyes landing on a stack of yellowed folders. I grabbed the top one, flipping it open, my breath catching as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Diagrams. Maps. Some of them looked like blueprints of underground tunnels. Others showed coordinates, none of them local. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a single black and white photograph. A group of men in Soviet military uniforms, standing in front of a metal hatch. The same hatch we had just opened. My stomach twisted. This place had been active once. Operational. And if those SUVs outside meant anything, someone still cared about whatever was buried here. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. Carter reached for the papers, scanning them quickly before stuffing them into his jacket. We take what we can. We leave. Now. But it was too late. A shadow moved just beyond the doorway. Then another. I barely had time to react before a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. Carter shoved me back, drawing his weapon. Hands up. Identify yourself. Silence. Then, a voice. Low. Controlled. You shouldn't be here. I couldn't see him, but I knew whoever he wasn't alone. I could feel it. Another shadow shifted in the hallway. Then the sound of a gun being cocked. Linda sucked in a sharp breath. Carter steadied his aim. I clenched my fists. Whoever they weren't just watching anymore. They were here. The story is more than just a suspenseful thriller, it serves as a powerful metaphor for uncovering hidden truths and the dangers that come with it. In 2025, as we navigate an era of increasing surveillance, misinformation, and buried histories, this story reminds us of the risks of asking the wrong questions in the right places. It teaches us that knowledge can be both a weapon and a liability. What we discover can put us in danger, but choosing to remain ignorant doesn't make the truth disappear. The protagonist's discovery of a buried Soviet facility parallels real-world issues where history is often rewritten, classified, or concealed for reasons beyond our understanding. It forces us to ask, How much of what we accept as reality is actually true? Another key lesson from the story is the illusion of privacy and control. The protagonist believed his property was his own, only to realize forces beyond his comprehension had already laid claim to it long before he arrived. In today's world, where personal data, digital footprints, and privacy are constantly at risk, the idea that we have full control over our own space, physical or digital, is becoming increasingly questionable. Lastly, the story teaches us about fear and the price of curiosity. Linda, once an antagonist, becomes an ally because fear makes enemies irrelevant in the face of a larger threat. The moment she realizes she's also being watched, her priorities shift. This mirrors how, in real life, adversity often forces people to work together. It's a reminder that while fear can divide, shared danger unites. In 2025, as we continue to uncover uncomfortable truths about history, government power, and hidden agendas, the biggest question remains: what would we do if we found something we weren't supposed to? If you were in the protagonist's shoes, what would you do next? Should he keep digging for the truth, or is it time to walk away before it's too late? With unknown forces watching his every move, the risk is higher than ever, but so is the need for answers. The abandoned Soviet facility beneath his land isn't just a relic of the past, it's a secret someone is willing to protect at all costs. Who are the men in the SUVs? What were the Soviets hiding? And most importantly, why is this bunker still active? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should he confront the people watching him? Should he try to retrieve more files and uncover the truth? Or is this a fight he can't win? Your suggestions might just determine his next move. Share your theories, ideas, and what you would do if you were standing in that cold, dimly lit corridor, hearing the sound of approaching footsteps. Would you run? Would you fight? Or would you push forward, no matter the cost? Let's solve this mystery together.